I never imagined that one day I'd become the villain in my own family story. I raised my son with every ounce of love I had. I welcomed his wife into my home as if she were my own daughter, and yet, they decided I was in the way. They stopped inviting me. They stopped answering my calls. And eventually, they tried to erase me completely. You're too much trouble. We need space. That was the last message I received before they disappeared from my life entirely. But what they didn't know is that I was already preparing something they could never expect. A secret that would tear apart the false peace they'd built, and remind them exactly who they had underestimated. Before I tell you how it all happened, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this is not just a story about betrayal, it's about revenge, cold, deliberate, and unforgettable. Chapter 1, The Silence Begins. It started with small things, tiny, almost invisible cracks that spread slowly through the foundation of my family. At first, I didn't even notice them. I told myself I was overthinking, that all families go through changes, that my son and his wife were just busy building their own lives. But deep down, in the quiet hours of the night, I felt the distance growing. I used to see them every Sunday. It was a tradition I cherished: breakfast together, laughter in the kitchen, my son teasing me about my overcooked pancakes, and my daughter-in-law pretending to complain while secretly eating a second helping. Those mornings were everything to me. They were proof that despite the years, despite the struggles, we were still a family. But then the excuses started. We're traveling this weekend. She's not feeling well. Work's been crazy, maybe next time. At first, I believed them. I even offered to help. I cooked meals and dropped them off, sent messages, left voicemails. Weeks passed. Then months. And little by little, I was erased from the picture, quite literally. I noticed it when my son posted a family photo online, his wife, their little boy, their dog, but not me. It was a gathering I hadn't even known about. The pain was sharp, but I swallowed it. Mothers are supposed to understand. We're supposed to accept that children grow up and drift away. But this didn't feel like drifting. It felt intentional, like I was being pushed out, step by step, replaced by silence. The final blow came one spring afternoon. I had spent days knitting a small sweater for my grandson's birthday, a simple thing, but made with love. I wrapped it in paper and tied it with a red ribbon. I even baked his favorite cookies. When I rang the bell, I expected to see his bright little face. Instead, my daughter-in-law opened the door, blocking the entrance with her body. "Oh," she said flatly. "You didn't get the message?" "What message?" I asked, clutching the gift a little tighter. "We're keeping things simple this year. Just immediate family." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "I am immediate family." She sighed and crossed her arms. "You're part of the extended circle now. It's better this way. Less stress for everyone." Extended circle. That phrase hit me harder than any insult ever could. I had raised the man she married. I had sacrificed everything, my dreams, my health, my future, to give him a life he could build upon. And now I was being categorized like some distant relative they barely remembered. I turned and walked away before she could see the tears burning behind my eyes. I left the gift on their porch. I don't know if they ever opened it. For weeks after that, I didn't sleep well. I replayed every conversation in my head, wondering if I had said something wrong, done something unforgivable. I scrolled through old photos and messages, searching for the moment things changed. There was none. There was no single betrayal I could identify, only a slow, calculated removal. The phone calls stopped. The invitations never came. And when I tried to reach out, my messages were met with silence. It was as if I had died, and they had simply moved on. That was when the anger began to take root. It didn't come suddenly, it crept in, quiet and deliberate, like smoke seeping under a locked door. I would see other grandparents posting pictures with their grandchildren and feel my stomach twist. I'd walk by a playground and hear children laugh, and it would feel like a knife in my chest. They wanted me gone. They wanted me erased. But they had forgotten one thing: you cannot erase the woman who built the foundation of your life. And the deeper they buried me under their silence, the more determined I became to rise again, not with tears, but with strategy. I began collecting memories, documents, letters, old photos, even financial records I had helped them with over the years. It wasn't out of spite, not yet. It was out of survival. If they wanted to cut me out, I needed to understand exactly what I had given, and what they stood to lose. And that's when I found it, a piece of information so powerful, so destructive, that it made my hands shake when I held it. A secret they had kept even from each other. At that moment, the pain inside me hardened into something colder. Something stronger. It was no longer about love or reconciliation. It was about justice, my justice. And justice would come on my terms. Chapter 2: The Secret Beneath the Surface. I didn't go looking for revenge. At least, not at first. All I wanted was to understand why. Why had the people I loved most decided that my presence was too heavy to bear? Why had I been turned from a mother into a ghost, unseen, unheard, unnecessary? The search for answers started innocently enough. I was cleaning out an old drawer when I stumbled upon a folder full of paperwork I'd forgotten I had. Most of it was trivial: copies of insurance forms, tax records, the kind of things mothers keep just in case their children ever need them. But among those yellowed pages was a file with my son's handwriting on it. A property agreement. I remembered the day he had begged me to co-sign the loan for their first home. "Just until we get approved, Mom," he'd said. "We can't do this without you." And, of course, I agreed. It was my name, my credit, my savings that made that house possible. Yet when I held that paper in my hands, I realized something they had conveniently never mentioned: my name was still listed on the deed. And it wasn't just that. Digging deeper into my old files, I found a second document, a loan I had taken out years earlier to help them start my son's business. I had signed the papers, put up part of my retirement as collateral, and never once asked to be paid back. The company had grown since then. I'd seen the new cars, the vacations, the designer clothes. But not once had they thanked me. Suddenly, a thought began to take shape, an unsettling, powerful thought: I had far more control than they believed. But the real discovery came a week later. A woman from my church, a quiet, well-meaning soul, stopped me after service and said, "I saw your daughter-in-law at the clinic the other day. Is everything okay?" I blinked. "What clinic?" "The fertility one," she said, lowering her voice. She looked upset. "I hope it's nothing serious." Fertility clinic. It was like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. A memory surfaced, a conversation I'd overheard years ago where my daughter-in-law had sworn she'd never go through IVF. Another where she'd said their son was miracle enough. And yet, apparently, there was more to the story. Curiosity led me down a path I hadn't planned to walk. A few discreet questions, a few casual conversations, and the truth began to emerge, one that neither of them wanted anyone to know. My grandson wasn't biologically my son's child. He had never known. I sat with that information for days, trying to process it. Anger, disbelief, sorrow, they all took turns clawing at my chest. But beneath them all was something else: clarity. This was the secret they had buried, the one they'd built their perfect little world upon. And now, it was in my hands. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about the hypocrisy. They had pushed me out of their lives, branded me as a burden, treated me like an outsider, all while living a lie that could shatter everything they had. I thought about confronting her, about showing up at their doorstep and screaming the truth until the walls shook. But that would be too easy. Too fast. Revenge, I realized, is not about rage. It's about patience. It's about letting your enemy feel safe before you pull the floor out from beneath them. So I waited. And I planned. The first thing I did was meet with a lawyer. I wanted to understand my position regarding the house, the business, and any legal strings that still tied them to me. The consultation was enlightening and deliciously empowering. Legally, I was still co-owner of their home. I still held a claim over part of the business. And, in the event of any dispute, I had the right to demand full repayment of the loans they had conveniently forgotten. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months. They had tried to erase me, but the ink of my signature was still woven into the very fabric of their lives. Still, there was one more thing I needed to do. The secret about my grandson was powerful, yes, but information like that is a weapon you only use once. I needed to decide when, how, and in front of whom that truth would detonate. And then, as if fate had scripted it for me, the perfect opportunity presented itself. A few weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. A formal invitation, engraved card, gold lettering, the works. My son and daughter-in-law were hosting a gala event to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the business I had helped them start. It was to be a night to remember. I smiled as I read the words. Yes. It would be. From that moment on, every decision I made was deliberate. I reached out to old contacts in the community, people they desperately wanted to impress. I made quiet donations to charities they were trying to court. I even reconnected with their business partners, casually reminding them of my role in the company's early days. By the time the night of the gala arrived, everyone important in their world had my name on their lips. And that was precisely what I wanted. Because when the curtain finally lifted, when the truth they had buried for years came screaming into the light, it wouldn't happen in private. It would happen under chandeliers and camera flashes. It would happen when their perfect image was on full display. And when that moment came, they wouldn't just regret cutting me out of their lives. They would wish they had never tried to cross me at all. Chapter 3, The Stage is Set. I circled the date of the gala on my calendar in red ink. It wasn't just another evening party. It was their night, the one they had been building toward for a decade. 10 years since the launch of the company. 10 years since they stood on the edge of financial ruin and I stepped in to save them. 10 years since I sacrificed my retirement, my security, and my peace to make sure my son's dream wouldn't collapse before it began. And they had the audacity to plan the entire celebration without even considering inviting me, until, of course, someone must have reminded them that excluding the co-owner could raise uncomfortable questions. That invitation had been nothing more than an act of damage control. But I didn't care. A door was a door. And once it opened, I intended to walk through it and burn the entire house down. In the weeks leading up to the event, I became a ghost haunting their world, visible enough to be noticed, invisible enough to be underestimated. I made polite calls to the board members. I sent handwritten notes to old investors congratulating them on a decade of our success. I even scheduled a meeting with their accountant, under the pretext of updating my personal records. All of it was strategic. All of it was to remind them, subtly but unmistakably, that I was not gone. I was woven into the bones of everything they had built. And behind the scenes, I prepared my weapon. I had gathered documents, signed contracts, bank transfers, emails, text messages. Every scrap of evidence that proved how much of their empire existed because of me. And then there was the photograph. The one my church friend had taken, entirely by accident, at the fertility clinic. A single blurry image of my daughter-in-law leaving the building, face hidden under sunglasses. Innocent enough on its own. But combined with the medical receipt I had managed to obtain through a legal request, a receipt that bore both her name and the date, it became a silent bomb. I wasn't reckless. I didn't want to destroy my grandson, he was the only innocent soul in this entire story. My intention was not to humiliate him. But the lie that had been built around him, that was a different story. 3 days before the gala, I sent an anonymous email to a journalist I knew, an investigative type who thrived on scandal. I didn't give details, just a breadcrumb. There's a story behind the Fernandez company that the public deserves to know. Ask about the silent investor. Ask about the secret that could break their family apart. It was enough. Now, the countdown had begun. The night of the gala arrived like a storm I had been waiting my whole life to unleash. I dressed deliberately, an elegant black dress, pearls, hair pinned just the way my late husband had loved. I wanted to look powerful, untouchable, like the matriarch I had been denied the chance to be. When I arrived at the venue, a sleek glass hall filled with gold lights and expensive wine, heads turned. Some smiled warmly, others looked surprised, maybe even a little nervous. My son approached me first, his smile too tight to be sincere. "Mom. You came." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. After all, I helped build it." The words landed like a needle under his skin. I saw it in the twitch of his jaw. He offered his arm, and together we walked through the sea of guests. Everywhere I turned, people congratulated us. It wasn't their company anymore. It was ours. And that subtle shift in language, that reminder of my presence, made my daughter-in-law's smile falter every time she heard it. The speeches began an hour later. My son stood on stage, his voice confident, his tone rehearsed. He spoke of humble beginnings, of perseverance, of hard work and vision. But not once did he mention my name. Not once did he acknowledge the sacrifices that had made it all possible. And then it was her turn. My daughter-in-law glided up to the microphone, dripping in gold and false humility. "We wouldn't be here without the support of our loved ones," she said sweetly, scanning the room, carefully avoiding my gaze. "Family means everything." That was the moment I felt something inside me shift. The anger I had been nursing for months hardened into a single, razor-sharp purpose. They had erased me in public, and it was time for the world to see the truth. When the applause died down, I stepped forward. I hadn't been invited to speak, but no one dared stop me. I took the microphone, smiled gently at the crowd, and began. 10 years ago, I said, my voice steady, a young man and his wife came to me with a dream. They had no money. No credit. No way to build what they wanted. So I did what any mother would do, I gave them everything I had. The room fell silent. My son shifted uncomfortably beside me. My daughter-in-law stared at the floor. I signed the loan for this company, I continued. I co-signed the mortgage on their home. I even mortgaged my retirement to help them start. And I never asked for anything in return. There was a murmur among the guests, curious, confused, intrigued. But what I didn't expect, I said softly, was to be thanked by being erased. To be pushed out of the very life I helped create. My son tried to interrupt. "Mom, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I snapped. Because the truth has been buried for far too long. I didn't reveal the deepest secret that night. Not yet. That was for later, a final blow reserved for a more devastating moment. But I gave them enough. Enough for the room to see through the carefully curated image they had built. Enough for whispers to start forming in corners. And as I handed the microphone back and walked off the stage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. This was just the beginning. They had tried to cut me out of their lives. Now, I was about to cut the ground out from under theirs. Chapter 4, Cracks in the Perfect Picture. The silence after my speech was delicious. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Exactly the kind of silence that tells you the mask has slipped and there's no putting it back on. I walked off the stage with my head held high, my heart pounding like a war drum inside my chest. Every step I took away from that microphone was a step closer to justice, my justice. At first, no one knew what to say. Some guests approached me with polite, cautious smiles, as if they were unsure whether to congratulate or comfort me. Others, the clever ones, simply nodded with knowing eyes. They understood. They'd seen this story before: the ungrateful child, the forgotten parent, the buried truth clawing its way back to the surface. But the best part? The shift in energy around my son and his wife was immediate. Moments ago, they had been the golden couple, admired, envied, adored. Now, whispers followed them wherever they walked. People looked at them not as a power duo, but as opportunists. Parasitic. Cruel. The cracks had appeared in their perfect picture, and I had put them there. I didn't speak to them for the rest of the night. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any confrontation could ever be. I lingered long enough to sip a glass of champagne and smile politely for photos, then I left before dessert was served. It was a strategic exit, sudden, deliberate, memorable. And it worked. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was my son. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another call. Then a third. A voicemail followed, his voice tight and trembling. "Mom, we need to talk. Please. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed me. What were you thinking?" I listened to the message twice, then deleted it without responding. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done, he was sorry that people knew. That was the difference. And I had no intention of soothing his wounded ego. By noon, my daughter-in-law tried her turn. Her voice was colder, sharper. "I don't know what you were trying to achieve," she hissed, "but you've ruined everything. Do you even understand the damage you've caused?" Oh, I understood. In fact, I counted on it. Within 48 hours, small cracks became fractures. A charity partner quietly withdrew from a collaboration. A potential investor postponed a meeting. Even a local newspaper published a short, speculative piece titled "Family Drama Behind Fernandez Enterprises." It wasn't a scandal, not yet. But it was enough to plant seeds of doubt. And then, right on schedule, the journalist I had contacted weeks before called me back. "I've been digging," she said. "And I think there's more to this story than you let on." "There is," I replied calmly. "But I'm not ready to tell it. Not yet." She was persistent. "If you give me what I think you're holding, this could be front-page news." I smiled to myself. "Patience," I said. "Timing is everything." Because while the fallout from the gala was satisfying, it was only the appetizer. The real course, the one that would completely unravel their world, still required preparation. And I was nothing if not patient. The next step was financial. I contacted my lawyer and instructed him to begin the process of reclaiming my stake in the company. We drafted a letter demanding repayment of the original loan, complete with interest, a sum that would cripple their operations if they attempted to pay it. And if they didn't? I had the legal right to seize assets, including the office they worked from and even the house they lived in. When the letter was delivered, the reaction was immediate. My son showed up at my door 2 days later, pale and panicked. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, voice breaking. "We don't have that kind of money. You'll ruin us." "Maybe you should have thought about that," I said evenly, "before you decided I didn't matter anymore." "Please," he whispered. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" I asked. "Enforce the terms of an agreement you signed? Reclaim what's legally mine. You wanted me out of your life, remember? I'm just following your wishes." He left with tears in his eyes, but I felt nothing. Sympathy had been buried long ago, beneath the weight of their betrayal. A week later, I escalated things further. Through my lawyer, I filed a motion to dissolve the partnership unless my terms were met. That motion was a ticking time bomb. Investors would see it. Banks would see it. Their entire empire, already wobbling from the public embarrassment, would start to shake. But even that wasn't the final blow. No, that was still coming. I knew exactly when and where I would reveal the secret that could obliterate their marriage. And I knew exactly who would be present when I did. Because a certain milestone was approaching, my grandson's 7th birthday. They had planned a large family celebration, invitations sent, photographers booked, a perfect little picture for social media. And I had every intention of being there. I wasn't going to scream the truth in anger. I wasn't going to throw accusations like daggers. No, I would do it calmly, surgically, and in front of the people whose opinions they valued most. Friends, family, colleagues. Everyone who still believed in their carefully constructed lie. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper in a crowded room. Sometimes it's a single sentence that detonates everything. And when I spoke those words, when I dropped the truth like a stone into their still, shallow waters, the ripples would never stop. Chapter 5, The Day the Truth Came Out. The day of my grandson's birthday dawned bright and deceptively peaceful, one of those spring mornings where the air smells like renewal and everything seems possible. It was almost poetic, really, because by the end of that day, nothing in their world would ever be the same again. I woke early, not out of excitement but out of strategy. My outfit was chosen with care, elegant but understated, the kind of attire that demanded respect without begging for attention. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a woman who held power, a woman who could no longer be dismissed or ignored. The party was set in the backyard of their suburban mansion, the one my signature had helped purchase. Balloons in shades of blue and silver danced in the breeze, tables were draped with white linen, and a catering team buzzed about like busy bees. Laughter floated through the air, the shallow, performative kind reserved for people who care more about appearances than authenticity. I arrived precisely 30 minutes late. Late enough to make an entrance, early enough to watch the tension spread across their faces the moment they saw me. My daughter-in-law's smile froze mid-sentence. My son's grip on his champagne glass tightened. They hadn't expected me to come, or maybe they had, but they were praying I'd behave. "Mom," my son said, his voice carefully neutral as he approached. I didn't think I wouldn't miss my grandson's birthday, I interrupted, brushing past him with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. After all, family is everything. Isn't that what you always say? For the next hour, I played my part. I handed my grandson his gift, a beautifully carved wooden chest filled with keepsakes from our family's history. I chatted with distant relatives, sipped tea with old neighbors, and even laughed at a few half-hearted jokes. Anyone watching would think I was just another proud grandmother celebrating her grandson's big day. But beneath the surface, the storm was gathering. The guest list was impressive: business partners, investors, close friends, even a few local reporters they'd invited for a human interest piece. All the people whose opinions mattered most to them were there. And that was exactly the way I wanted it. At around 3 p.m., after the cake had been cut and the gifts opened, my daughter-in-law clinked her glass and called for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here," she said with a practiced smile. "We're so grateful to have such wonderful friends and family to share this special day with." Her words oozed in sincerity, but no one seemed to notice. They were too busy applauding. Too busy buying into the fantasy. And then she made the mistake I had been waiting for: she mentioned me. "And of course," she added, her smile tightening, "we're grateful that Grandma could join us today." The room turned toward me. That was my cue. I rose slowly from my seat, my heartbeat steady, my resolve unshakable. "I'm grateful to be here too," I said, my voice calm but commanding. After all, it's not every day a grandmother gets to celebrate the birthday of a child who changed everything. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. My son shifted uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law's face went pale. "I remember the day he was born," I continued. "I remember the joy. I remember thinking that nothing could ever come between us as a family. And I was right, because truth, as painful as it is, always finds a way to surface." "Mom," my son said sharply, his voice low and warning. "Not here." "Oh, but here is the perfect place," I replied, meeting his gaze. "Because this isn't just about family anymore. It's about honesty. It's about the lies that have poisoned everything we built." The air was electric. Guests shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" I turned to my daughter-in-law. "Do you want to tell them, or shall I?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." The next words left my mouth slowly, deliberately, like a blade being unsheathed. "This boy, whom I love with all my heart, is not my son's biological child." The effect was immediate. Gasps echoed around the garden. A wine glass shattered somewhere behind me. My son stared at me, his face draining of color, his world crumbling in real time. "That's not true," my daughter-in-law shouted, but her voice cracked. "She's lying." "Am I?" I asked, pulling a folded document from my purse. "This is the receipt from the fertility clinic you visited. The one you thought no one knew about." She lunged for the paper, but I held it out of reach. "You should have been honest," I said softly. "You should have told him before building a life on a foundation of lies." The chaos that followed was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Some guests left immediately, uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. Others stayed, hungry for every word. My son demanded answers, his voice breaking as he pleaded, "Is it true? Is it true?" And she had no defense. Only tears and silence. I stood there, watching it all unfold, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a burden. Not as a nuisance. As a force. As the woman they had underestimated. The party ended in disaster. Guests slipped out quietly, avoiding eye contact. My daughter-in-law locked herself in the bathroom. My son sat on the edge of the porch steps, staring blankly into the distance. When I walked past him to leave, he didn't speak. He didn't even look up. But I paused beside him and said one last thing. "You tried to erase me," I whispered. "Now you'll remember me for the rest of your life." I walked away without looking back. I didn't need to. The damage was done. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a weapon, and I had wielded it flawlessly. Chapter 6: The Collapse. In the days that followed the party, their world began to crumble, not with an explosion, but with the slow, inevitable collapse of a structure that had been rotting from within for years. And I watched it all happen with the kind of calm detachment only someone who has been deeply wounded can truly understand. The first call came the next morning. My son's voice was hollow, distant, like a man who had suddenly realized he'd been living in a stranger's life. "Mom," he said quietly. "It's true." She admitted it. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She said she didn't mean for it to happen. That she was ashamed. That she thought I'd never forgive her. His voice cracked. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "You're my son," I said finally. "And you're stronger than you think." But strength wouldn't save him from what was coming. Truth has a way of destroying everything false around it, and their entire marriage had been built on a lie. Within a week, they were living in separate rooms. Within 2, she had taken their son and moved in with her sister. And within a month, divorce papers were filed. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. And in some twisted, honest part of me, I did. But there was also something else, something colder and deeper. A sense that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance. About restoring the order that had been stolen from me when they cast me aside. The scandal spread quickly. Word of the birthday party incident traveled faster than wildfire through their social circle. Friends stopped answering calls. Invitations disappeared. Even business partners, the same ones who had once lined up to praise them, began to distance themselves. And then came the financial consequences. The legal motion I'd filed to reclaim my stake in the company was now public record, and the banks didn't like what they saw. Their credit line was frozen pending the outcome. Investors pulled out of 2 major projects. Without funding, the company's growth stalled, and layoffs followed. What had once been a thriving enterprise was now a house of cards trembling in the wind. My son called again, this time desperate. "Mom, we're losing everything," he said. "Please, can't we talk? Can't we fix this?" I almost laughed. Fix this? He had tried to erase me from his life, and now he wanted me to help rebuild the ruins? No. This was his lesson. His reckoning. "You made your choices," I replied. "Now you live with them." "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I have nothing left." "That's not true," I said coldly. You still have the truth. And that's more than you gave me. The days blurred together after that. Their house went on the market. The company announced a restructuring. My daughter-in-law, or rather, my former daughter-in-law, vanished from social media, her curated life of perfect photos replaced by silence. And yet, despite all the chaos, despite the destruction I had unleashed, I felt no guilt. None. Because guilt implies wrongdoing, and I had done nothing wrong. I had simply exposed what was already there. I had held up a mirror to their choices and forced them to look. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the party, my son showed up at my door. He looked nothing like the man I had raised. His hair was unkempt, his clothes disheveled, and there was a heaviness in his eyes I had never seen before. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I stepped aside without a word. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had fed him as a child, where we had shared birthdays and Christmas dinners, where he had once promised to always be my son no matter what. "I know you hate me," he said, staring down at his hands. "I don't hate you," I replied. "I pity you." He flinched. "I deserve that." There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't blame you for what you did. I know we hurt you. I know we were cruel. But you've made your point. And if there's anything left of the person you raised me to be, I'm asking for mercy." Mercy. The word hung between us like smoke. Did he deserve it? Maybe. Did I owe it to him? Absolutely not. But in that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge isn't about watching someone burn. It's about making them understand why the fire started in the first place. "You will rebuild," I said quietly. "You will start again. And maybe, if you truly learn from this, you'll become a man worthy of forgiveness. But that's not for me to give you. That's for you to earn." He nodded, tears spilling silently down his cheeks. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The revenge was complete. Not because I had destroyed their lives, but because I had forced them to confront the consequences of their actions. They had taken my love, my sacrifices, my loyalty, and thrown them aside as if they were worthless. And in return, I had shown them the price of that betrayal. It wasn't rage that satisfied me in the end. It was the knowledge that they would never forget me. That every decision they made from now on would be shaped by the memory of the woman they underestimated. And that, I realized, was the most powerful revenge of all. Chapter 7, Terms and Conditions. Revenge doesn't truly end when the damage is done, it ends when control returns to your hands. I learned that in the weeks that followed the explosion. The whispers in town changed. I was no longer the bitter, unwanted grandmother. I was the woman who had pulled back the curtain and shown everyone what was really happening behind that perfect picture. And once the truth was out, there was no putting it back. The calls started soon after. Lawyers. Accountants. 2 members of the company's board who had ignored me for years now suddenly wanted to have a conversation. They all asked the same question, wrapped in different polite words. "What would it take for you to stop?" I didn't rush to them. I made them come to me. Meetings were held at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once served pancakes to my son before school, where I had wrapped birthday gifts for a grandson who now bore a truth bigger than his parents could face. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the sunlight fall on their uncomfortable faces as they tried to negotiate with the woman they had erased. The first to arrive was my son's attorney. A young man, too confident for his own good. "Mrs. Fernandez," he said smoothly, "our client would like to find a resolution that spares everyone further pain." "Pain?" I repeated with a raised eyebrow. "What you call pain, I call justice." He shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "My client is prepared to offer a significant settlement in exchange for your withdrawal from legal action and a public statement clarifying certain events. In other words, hush money." They wanted me to disappear, again, but this time with a check in my hand instead of tears on my pillow. I smiled politely. Tell your client that my price isn't money. It's dignity. It's acknowledgement. And it's control. The next day, the board members came. They were more careful with their words. We'd like to discuss a possible restructuring, one of them said. A way for you to retain a symbolic role in the company. Symbolic? I asked, leaning forward. Do I look like a symbol to you? No, I didn't want a title. I wanted a seat. A real one. On the board. With voting power. With access to financial reports. I wanted them to look across the table and see the woman they had tried to bury, not as a ghost, but as a decision-maker. And then there was my son. When he arrived, he didn't come with a lawyer or a proposal. He came with a suitcase full of documents and an expression that looked 20 years older than his age. Mom, he said quietly, I'm selling the company. I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard correctly. It's over. Investors are gone. Contracts are cancelled. Everything's falling apart. I can't fix it. Good, I said flatly. Maybe now you understand what happens when you build something on a lie. But then he did something I didn't expect. He pushed the suitcase toward me. Inside were deeds, contracts, accounts, everything tied to the company, the house, even the trust fund for my grandson. I want you to have it, he said. You earned it. You built this more than I ever did. I looked down at the pile of papers. 10 years of my life, 10 years of sacrifices, of being ignored, of being pushed aside, now sitting before me like a kingdom that had been reclaimed. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder, deeper, finality. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was one more term, the most important of all. You'll sign over 30% of the company to a foundation in my name, I said. It will fund scholarships, housing, and legal aid for single mothers. And my grandson will never, ever, be kept from me again. He nodded without hesitation. Anything you want. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was submission, the acknowledgement that I had been wronged, and that my power could no longer be denied. And that, in itself, was more satisfying than any apology could ever be. In the weeks that followed, things shifted. My name was added to the company's board. The foundation was established. And slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild a relationship with my grandson, one based not on lies or control, but on truth. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and think about how everything had unfolded. People always think revenge is about anger, about getting even. But that's not it at all. Revenge is about rewriting the story they tried to erase you from. It's about taking back the pen and finishing the sentence they left hanging. And that's exactly what I had done. They had tried to cut me out of their lives. Now, I was written into every chapter of theirs, permanently. Chapter 8, The Legacy of a War Won. Months passed, and the dust began to settle, not quietly, but in the kind of slow, grinding way that follows any great collapse. The empire they had built on my silence was gone. The life they had curated for cameras and parties and public praise had evaporated into nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. And through it all, I remained. Unmoved. Unapologetic. Unforgettable. The company was smaller now, leaner, humbler, but it was mine as much as his. My name appeared in press releases, on board meeting agendas, in business magazines that once ignored me. At first, people wrote about the family scandal with a mix of fascination and pity. But over time, that narrative shifted. I was no longer the bitter mother seeking revenge. I was the matriarch who reclaimed what was hers. I was the woman who refused to be erased. And they, my son and his former wife, were forever marked by the truth I had unleashed. She disappeared entirely, moving to another city under a cloud of disgrace, starting over in anonymity. My son, to his credit, stayed. He rebuilt from the ground up. He cut ties with people who had only stood by him when things were easy. He learned humility, patience, and the sharp sting of consequences. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I did speak to him. We shared meals, carefully, cautiously, and slowly began stitching together a version of a relationship that no longer relied on the fantasy of a perfect family. He knew better now. He knew who I was and what I was capable of. And for the first time in his adult life, he treated me with something far more valuable than affection, respect. As for my grandson, he became the reason I softened, just a little. I spent weekends with him, teaching him how to plant seeds in the garden, how to bake the same cookies I used to make for his father. He didn't understand the storm that had torn his world apart, and I didn't intend to burden him with it. To him, I was just grandma, steady, loving, present. And that was enough. Sometimes, when he'd fall asleep on my lap after a long afternoon of stories and laughter, I'd stare out the window and think about how close I had come to disappearing. How easily they might have succeeded in writing me out of their story if I had let them. And that thought, that terrifying possibility, only made me more certain that I had done the right thing. I knew there were people who judged me. People who thought I had gone too far, who whispered that no revenge was worth destroying a family. But those people had never been erased. They had never stood in the doorway of a house they paid for and been told to sleep on the couch. They had never been told they were too much, too old, too inconvenient. No, they hadn't been stripped of their dignity and expected to smile through the humiliation. I had. And that was why I had no regrets. One evening, months after everything had fallen apart, my son and I sat together in the kitchen, the same kitchen where so many of our battles had begun. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his hands still trembling slightly from the weight of everything he'd lost. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. I thought about it for a long time. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate you. I hate what you became. But I think, maybe you hate that too." He nodded, his eyes shining with a shame I had never seen before. "I do. Every day." And for the first time, I saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy I had raised, the one who once clung to my hand when he was afraid, who once believed I could fix anything. That boy was gone, yes. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for the man to become someone better. "Then learn from it," I said. "And never forget who you tried to erase. Because I never will." The truth is, revenge didn't heal me. It didn't erase the years of pain or bring back the moments they stole. But it gave me something more precious than forgiveness, power over my own story. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's narrative. I was the author. And every chapter from here on out, whether written in anger, in peace, or in something in between, would be mine. As I watched my grandson chase fireflies in the fading light of the backyard, I felt something unexpected: peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from remembering, from knowing that I fought back, that I demanded to be seen, that I refused to vanish quietly into the margins. They had tried to cut me out of their lives. But in the end, it was I who had rewritten theirs. And no one, not betrayal, not lies, not time, could ever take that away from me. Epilogue: what remains? People like to believe that revenge is ugly, that it poisons the soul and leaves nothing but ashes behind. Maybe that's true for some. Maybe for those who seek vengeance out of hatred, it becomes a cage. But for me, revenge was never about hate. It was about memory. About refusing to let the people who broke me pretend they hadn't. About refusing to vanish into silence simply because it made their lives easier. I didn't choose this war. It was handed to me the day they decided I was no longer worth a seat at their table. And when they slammed the door, I learned how to build my own, stronger, wider, impossible to ignore. Do I regret it? Not for a single breath. Would I do it again? 1,000 times over. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit: sometimes, the only way to teach people the value of what they've taken is to let them live without it. Sometimes, the only way to reclaim your dignity is to hold it up like a weapon and refuse to hand it back. My son will carry the weight of his choices for the rest of his life. My former daughter-in-law will never fully outrun the truth she tried so hard to bury. And my grandson, innocent, bright, untouched by the worst of it, will grow up knowing that strength doesn't always come from kindness. Sometimes, it comes from fire. But the most important lesson isn't theirs. It's mine. I learned that love without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. I learned that forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. And I learned that when people try to erase you, they're not just removing you from their story, they're daring you to write a better one without them. I did. And now, when I look at the life I've rebuilt, quieter, smaller, but mine, I don't see bitterness. I see sovereignty. I see a woman who refused to be reduced to a footnote. A woman who demanded her place not because it was given, but because it was earned. Maybe, one day, forgiveness will find its way back into my heart. Maybe not. But forgiveness was never the point. The point was to be seen again, to take back everything they tried to strip away and show them that I was never disposable. I am the storm they never saw coming. I am the ghost they tried to bury, now standing in the light. I am the woman they underestimated, and the woman they will never forget. And that, in the end, is the most powerful revenge of all.